Hey there, guys. It's Nick, the ASMR nerd, and welcome to another episode of Relaxing Reviews. Today, in what is apparently becoming my ongoing quest to review every single budget 60% mechanical keyboard in the world, we're taking a look at a product from a company called Velocifire. Velocifire. And this name might be familiar to you, and perhaps it's because you saw one of my previous reviews of their products. I've reviewed two keyboards from Velocifire here on the channel before, another 60% keyboard and a 10 keyless board, both of which were wireless and aimed squarely at the budget market. Both were in the sort of $45 to $50 price range. And I found them to be very well built and good value. But these products were aimed more at typists and sort of productivity work than at gamers. The product we're looking at today is aimed squarely at the budget gaming demographic. Today we're looking at the Velocifire M2, or otherwise known as TKL61WS, 60% mechanical gaming keyboard. This keyboard comes with everything you'd expect from a gaming board. It's got RGB backlighting, it's got software remapping and configurability. It even has hot swap sockets as well that let you switch out the switches for other kinds, which is always a nice feature to see. The Velocifire M2 comes in at around $60, which puts it right in that very, very competitive market segment alongside the likes of the Fecker Machinist 01, which I reviewed a while back, other boards from the likes of like a Royal Kludge, like the RK61, which I haven't reviewed yet, but I might be getting it at some point. And all those kind of budget-oriented 60% gaming keyboards. What we're going to check today is whether Velocifire's M2 can distinguish itself from the competition, the very, very stiff competition. Like those other boards I reviewed from Velocifire, it is also wireless, but it is Bluetooth wireless rather than requiring a USB dongle. So we're going to be giving it a thorough inspection today and a full test drive to see if it is in fact worth your dollars in the budget segment. Velocifire was kind enough to send over a review sample for us to look at, so without further ado, let's take a closer look at Velocifire's M2 60% mechanical keyboard. And here we have the Velocifire M2 in box. And as we've seen on previous products from Velocifire, it is a very simple box. Although there is actually a little bit more going on here than on some of their older packaging. Primarily, it says right across the front, make typing better. That's something I think we can all get behind. That is a coherent English sentence. So that's a step up from many sort of budget-oriented keyboard boxes and then the branding that I've seen in past. We have Velocifire branding over here, but overall, we're basically just looking at a plain cardboard box. No flashy colors or glossy images of the board. Really nothing over there. Not much over here. Got just a barcode over there. And on the back, we see the model listed as the TKL61WS. which is interesting because TKL technically stands for 10 keyless, which refers to keyboards without the numpad. And this is one of those, but usually a TKL board is a larger size that includes the arrow keys and the nav cluster. Anyway, but this is also known as the M2. They seem to use both names for the model. So, made in China, and their website with a QR code. That pretty much covers it. No indication on the outside, the exterior, as to what kind of switches we might find inside, but I believe, I could be wrong, but I think it's only actually available with Outemu browns. That could be wrong. I should double check that. But I know this one comes with browns anyway. Of course, it is hot swappable in the sense that it can take other Outemu switches. So, not wide hot swappability, I don't think, but it will take other Outemus. I will check that for you too as well. Here we've got some pack-ins, some extras. Look at those colorful modifier caps. These are dye-sub PBT caps. They are an additional pack-in or an extra that you can add on. I believe for Kickstarter backers they may have been included, but if you're just buying off Velocifire's website, I think you will have to pay extra for the extra caps. That's okay though. They look like they're very thick. We'll open up one of these packets to see. They look well made though. And then we actually have the same pack, but for the Mac modifier keys. You can see the option key there. So that's one of Velocifire's big selling points here, is wide compatibility for both PC and Mac. So presumably the keyboard is contained in here. Take a look at that in a second. Here we've got user guide, keycap puller, the cheap type, and a switch puller because this is hot swappable to a degree. We've got just a piece of cardboard. We've got a very nice looking braided USB cable with a Velcro cable wrap there. The braiding feels thick and it's not rough, it's nice and smooth. This is a nice high quality cable. Pretty heavy gauge. No Velocifire branding on the plastic molding on either end, but we've got Type A USB to plug into your device, and thankfully Type C to plug into the keyboard. It's a nice sturdy cable, looks to be of a good length, and USB Type C is of course always welcome, and the fact that it's got a detachable cable at all is not a given at this price point, so happy to see it. A little bit of padding here. Seems adequate to protect the board in transit. No complaints there. And that's everything in the box. Let's take a quick look at the packets. So, as you saw, got a very unfortunately cheap looking keycap puller. I don't recommend using this type because you may, in fact, scratch your keycaps. I prefer the wire type, which I actually brought one over here for pulling the caps off. And then just a very, very basic switch puller in case you want to pull out those Outemu browns and swap them with something else. We've also got these packs of keycaps. Let's take a quick look at them because they do look pretty nice. It's going to be a little loud, I think. They come in a resealable plastic package. At least in theory resealable. That's my stomach. Oh my gosh. I'm hungry. You might be able to tell. There we go. Crinkly little bag. So here we've got a collection of PBT modifier keys. For those of you who don't know or don't recall, PBT is just an alternative plastic material. The rest of the caps on this board, the stock keycaps, are made of ABS, which is a more typical material for keycaps, and especially in budget products. There's nothing wrong with it. It has good wear resistance and such, but it does shine up a little bit more readily in comparison to PBT, whereas PBT has just a slightly more robust feel to it, especially when they're nice and thick, like these keycaps. These are very thick. Very little flex, and it's more resistant to finger oils. It doesn't shine up so easily. You know, I assumed that these were dye-sub PBT, which would mean that the legends are basically dyed right into the plastic. They will never wear. But you know what? I don't think they are. I think these are just pad printed, because I can feel some relief to these legends. Let's get it real close so you can see. So I think this is just printed on the surface, which is actually a real shame, because it means that they will wear off eventually. You can't really see it, but I can feel there's definitely some roughness to that. So I think these might just be pad printed, which, yeah, that's kind of disappointing. Considering that these are an extra add-on, you have to pay money for these extra caps. I was really hoping they would use the dye sublimation method to dye those legends on there, rather than just using this pad printing, which honestly doesn't look that nice either. They're not very bold. It's kind of, I don't know, the legends look a little bit fuzzy. Or maybe there's some kind of laser etching going on there. Maybe that's what it is, laser etched. I bet you that is what's happening. I'll get to the bottom of it. I'll look it up for you, but they're not dye sublimated anyway. There's some kind of etching or pad printing going on, which, if they're laser etched, they're probably going to last. But, you know, I think these might be pad printed. You can just see. It's hard. I need to catch the light just right, but there's kind of a relief to the legends. Anyway, that'd be disappointing if that was the case. I will investigate further, though, and let you know. The good news is the caps themselves, as I said, are quite thick, robust-looking keycaps. But they are not shine-through. These are not shine-through. No double shot situation going on here, so the legends will not be illuminated. Whereas I believe we will see in a moment, but I think, well, we'll find out. I'm not sure actually if the stock ABS caps on this thing are shine-through or not. We'll find out in a second when we take a peek at it. These caps sound nice though, that's for sure. And they do come in a set for Mac and for Windows. Here's the board. Oh, I'll quickly show you. Very quickly. Let's take a look at the user guide. Not much to write home about here. Looks pretty straightforward. It is in English, which is nice. Your basic functions, all that stuff there. So here is the board itself, and yeah, they look like double shot shine through caps, ABS. I found Velocifire stock caps to be of good quality previously, even though they were ABS, and these seem to be the same kind of things. We'll take a closer look at the caps in a moment, but let's just take a little tour around. It is a perfectly standard 61 key, 60% layout. So all your standard replacement keycaps will work, which is nice for compatibility. You can see that the case is pretty minimalistic, and it's got this very standard wedge-shaped profile with about 5 or 6 degrees of inclination to it, with these kind of cut-out corners on the bottom. It looks honestly identical, or very close to what we've seen on the An Pro, the Fecker Machinist, and similar boards. The case itself seems to be made of ABS. The corners are beveled, again, as we've seen on those other cases. And the texture is this kind of matte black texture, which repels fingerprints fairly well, which is nice to see. Around the back, USB Type-C connector right in the center there. Nothing around that side. And around the front, which is a little shorter, we have the Velocifire branding, which I'm not a fan of their logo. I think it looks a bit tacky, honestly. But it's not super conspicuous there. It doesn't bother me too much. Let's take a look at the back. So here we've got rubberized feet to prevent skidding. 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't have any flip out feet, so this angle, this incline is what you're stuck with. It doesn't get any less or more. We've got a dedicated on-off switch back here. This will be for activating the wired versus wireless Bluetooth mode. Nice to see a hardware switch. You can see when we turn it on. Might be hard for you to tell, but we get a backlight. There's a bit of flicker there right now. We'll take a much closer look at the backlight in a couple of minutes, but there it is. And we've got just some basic information, such as the model, a serial number, and then something that actually looks like it's been Sharpied out here. That's weird. This could be because this is an early production model sent out to reviewers, but I don't know what's been Sharpied out there. That's slightly strange. And that's it. That's really it. got these angled sides to the case down here, as I was explaining earlier. Very similar to what we've seen on the N Pro 2 and the Fecker Machinist and a number of other 60% boards in the budget range. Really not much else to see or talk about with the case. It feels sturdy, much as I've come to expect from Velocifire. Honestly, their products that I've reviewed in past have been simple but sturdy. They feel well built, even though they're all made of plastic. They don't incorporate much in the way of metal. They still feel well made, and I would say that applies here as well. The weight is good. It's, again, about what you'd expect for a 60% keyboard, maybe a little bit heavier. A wireless 60% board, I should specify, because it's the battery that confers a lot of the weight. Let's just take off a couple of caps here so that we can see what's going on. So the stock caps, goodness, my tummy growling away. The stock caps are double shot ABS plastic, which means that the primary legends will never wear away. The secondary legends, however, are very clearly pad printed. You can feel the relief. In theory, they could wear out. The primary legends are for Windows, secondary are for Mac OS. But yeah, these keys are actually, there's a bit of flex there, but they're pretty well made. These stock keycaps are above average on Velocifire boards, I would say. Underneath, we have a metal top plate, steel, no doubt, in black. And we have our Outemu switches, which are characteristically sort of boxed in. The stem has the half box kind of structure around it, which is seen in all modern Outemu switches like that. I've also got a switch puller of my own here, although I could use the stock one, but I won't. I'm just going to use this one to pull out, if I can, to pull out the switch. You know what? Before we do that, let's pull off the shift key to make a little more room to operate. And also look at the stabilizers. The stabilizers are in black. They are not lubed, so they'll be a bit rattly, but they're just standard plate-mounted cherry style stabilizers. And let's pull out this here switch. Goodness. There we go. We have the typical Outemu switch with translucent top housing to allow the surface-mounted LEDs to shine through. I don't think these will fit other switch types, but I will test it out for you. Outemu switches have thinner contact pins there than like cherry style switches and kale and others like that, but or then specifically cherry switches, not just cherry style, but which means that often these hot swap type sockets made for Outemu are incompatible with other switch types, but I will test that for you. Other than that, not much to see or report. Pretty standard. So now we're going to take a look at the backlighting, the wireless functionality, and take it for a typing test, as well as check out the software, which I believe it has. So let's go take a look. And here we have the Velocifire M2 plugged in with all its RGB goodness on display. I'm going to go over the RGB backlighting functionality. Then we'll talk a little bit about some of the secondary functions on the keys. We'll look at Bluetooth connectivity, and then we'll look at software and finally take it for a typing test. So starting off with backlighting functionality, this is what it looks like by default when you first plug it in. I should point out, I took those PBT keycaps that we saw in the unboxing, and I popped them on here just for fun. They're not shine through, so you don't get the illuminated legends like you do across the rest of the board, but you do get a little bit of illumination of the caps just through the slight translucency of the caps themselves, particularly the lighter colored ones, like the yellow ones, do illuminate a bit, whereas the red and the green not so much, the blue a tiny bit. So I'll show this to you again actually with the lights on at the end of the video, just so you can appreciate how it looks with the rainbow colored caps on there in full light. Anyhow, so for the backlighting functionality, we've got some basic controls for backlight speed. So that's function square brackets. So we're slowing it down, it looks like. There we go. And when we hit the bottom of a particular setting, we get some flashing over here. We can speed it up again. Yeah, so it looks like there's about 3 or 4 speed increments, but on the slowest speed. That's quite chill. I enjoy that. I prefer my RGB effects to be on the slower side. I find that when they're too fast, it's frantic, and I like something chill. Unsurprisingly, maybe. Okay, over here we've got color cycling and direction switch. So there's the direction switch for this effect. It's now going right to left, back from left to right. Here, this will cycle through the basic colors available. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 basic colors. Well, 8 colors, 8 shades, and then a multicolor option. And then we've got backlight brightness, which is set to maximum right now. As you can see, it's flashing there. If we press over a few times, we end up with no lights at all. So you can turn the backlights off by doing that. I think that's the only way to do so, actually. There's no dedicated backlight on-off key config. So in terms of brightness steps, we have off, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 total levels of brightness, and then off as well. Okay. And then we have the effects. There are 18 effects in total baked into this board. So those are hidden under the function I, O, and P keys. Each one has 6 effects on it. It's a little bit arbitrary, but sure, why not? So function I gives us what is apparently a solid color. We've got reactive modes here. This mode changes with every press. The typical kind of shooting out in lines there rather than circles. That's pretty similar to the one that we just had, sort of two effects ago. And back to the solid. Of course, you can cycle colors on this mode, the solid color mode. Probably all the modes, I would expect. Under the O, we have the colored wave that we started with. We have a vertically scrolling colored wave. And all of these can be set to single colors as well. We've got this sort of rotation rainbow. This looks like a breathing mode. through the colors, I imagine. Oh, maybe not. Oh, it's just a breathing mode. Okay. Here we go. This cycles now through the colors. Oh, good. We've got the circular rainbow ripple. This is always one of my favorites. It's nice and symmetrical. It makes me think of ripples on a pond. It's nice and chill. And then we're back to our colored wave. And under the P, we've got raindrops, twinkling stars, another sort of twinkling one where the lights are just changing in color. We've sort of got waves. It looks like they're going back and forth, and they're sort of by row. Interesting. Oh yes, and the classic, whatever this is. I don't know why you would ever choose to use this, but anyway. No offense intended if you do use that mode. And same with this one. They're just too frantic for me. And I think we're back to the raindrops type. So let's keep it on the colored wave for now. And that is the backlight story, at least until we get to the software. Oh, actually, that's not quite true. There's one other thing. Over here under the Z, X, and C keys, we can do remapping of colors on keys just sort of arbitrarily. You'll see what I mean, per key color config. So they're basically 3 presets, function Z, X, and C. These are just the defaults, but if you want to customize, function tab puts it into customization mode. This trio of lights flashes while it's in that mode. And then you can just press which keys you want illuminated. If you want to change the color, just press them again. And we can cycle through presumably all 9 colors that we saw earlier, or off. So you can kind of do this. Like so. And you can illuminate the keys you want and not the ones you don't. And then you can go function tab and it saves that preset. So we can switch away to that one and back to preset Z. And there we have our saved lighting configuration. But I believe the lighting can also be changed in software. And that should give us access to many more color options. Such as, we're just using the full RGB spectrum, right? So, as opposed to just the presets. So, but if you don't have software available, there's those 3 lighting configs that can be customized and saved on the board without any software or drivers whatsoever. Okay, let's look quickly at secondary functions here. There are a lot of them, as it turns out. So by default, you hold down the function key, obviously, which is in the bottom right here, to get at the secondary function layer. But part of the challenge here is that it's not fully labeled in the secondary legends. And actually, it is not included entirely, at least, in the manual that shipped with the board, the paper one that you saw printed that we looked at very briefly during the unboxing. There is a more up-to-date version available online on Velocifire's website that includes the mappings for all the secondary functions. So I do recommend that you go download it there. And maybe by the time you get this board, it'll be shipping with the updated manual. I should hope so. I think mine is an early production version. That was sent out to reviewers. So, but very briefly, we have the function, and then under the number keys, we have a variety of FROW functions, like our F1, F2, F3, all that stuff. We also have, interestingly, a second set of secondary functions, tertiary functions, one might call them, that are only enabled under Mac OS, it seems to say in the manual. So those are media keys, brightness adjustments, things like that, volume up, down. It seems that those are not available in Windows by default, although you probably could remap it in software. You just get the F keys as a secondary function. But we also have a collection of other things like function T is print screen, function G is insert, function H is home. So the nav cluster and these things are all mapped kind of a little haphazardly across the keyboard, honestly. J is page up, M is page down, so that sort of makes some sense. B is delete, N is end. Okay, so you know what? No, it's not haphazard at all. They've just bound the 6 nav cluster keys to these keys here, these 6 here, but they're in the same configuration. So delete comes in under function B, which is a little bit awkward to use one-handed, especially with my left hand. Really both hands, but it's doable. So anyway, those are there. And then there are a few other functions. Function A and S will switch between Mac OS mode under function S and Windows mode under function A. I'm not quite sure why you'd want to do that on the fly. Ideally, well, I guess it can't auto-detect what you've plugged it into, so I guess if you plug it into a Mac, you just have to go function S to make sure you're in the right mode. Function R switches between wired and Bluetooth mode, so we are under wired mode right now, but we will look at Bluetooth in a second. You switch between Bluetooth devices with function Q, W, and E, and that is very typical. And we'll again look at that in a moment. And then function Windows key will lock or unlock the Windows key. Interestingly, you can go function control, left control specifically, and you see how the left control key lit up in white. What that is a function lock. So we are now locked onto the secondary function layer. So we can now press, for instance, B for delete, or H for page up, or whatever, or H for home, pardon me, without having to hold down the function key. And then we can press function left control again to switch back to normal operation. So it's nice that they give us the the typical secondary layer where you have to hold down the function key and then press the corresponding key, in addition to a function layer toggle with the function left control. It's kind of a nice thing. Another interesting thing that they do is that by default, when you tap on Alt or the menu key or Control or the question mark and backslash key over here on the right hand side, by default, tapping those keys provides arrow key functionality. We've seen this tap key function once before on the An Pro 2, and that is one of my very favorite features of the An Pro 2. I think it's a really, really clever feature, and honestly, I'm surprised that more 60% keyboard manufacturers haven't adopted it. Really great to see Velocifire taking that on and using that, because I love being able to just use arrow keys without having to hold down a function key. However, the implementation, here differs a little bit from that on the An Pro 2. On the An Pro 2, they're actually over here, and the up key is the right shift rather than the question mark key. And there's a good reason for that on the An Pro 2. The reason is that the way Velocifire has done it by default, if you want the question mark, you have to actually toggle the secondary function layer. Because again, or the forward slash for that matter, because by default when you tap it, so if you go shift and just tap it like you would for a question mark, it's not a question mark, it's just the up arrow. And as a matter of fact, even if you hold it, you don't get the question mark. It just holds the up arrow. So maybe it's not even a tap thing. Yeah, no, I'm mistaken. You actually have to hold, even if you hold it down, it acts as an arrow key. So the only way to get at the primary functions of these keys here, to switch them away from arrow keys, is to use the function key. So if you want forward slash, you have to go function, and then this key here. If you want a question mark, you have to go function shift question mark. That's the only way to get a question mark. And that to me is a little bit much. Like I use question marks pretty often when I'm typing. I'm not used to having to press 3 keys and hold 2 of them, press 1, just to get a question mark. And so I find myself trying to do my normal shift question mark. And in doing so, I actually am going shift up arrow, and then I select the entire row of what I've just typed. And then if I start typing the next sentence after that, it overwrites what I just typed. I've been caught by that tons and tons of times. So it's a bit of an annoyance. You can certainly learn to avoid that, and I am learning. I'm getting better at it. But it is still, it's a questionable choice, I guess. I applaud Velocifire's choice of providing arrow keys on the main function layer in one form or another. I question whether it was worth sacrificing the standard functioning of the question mark in order to do that. Maybe that's a personal preference thing. I'm sure I will get used to it as I use the board more. But I do think that Oben's implementation on the Anpro 2, where they have the tap key functionality and the up arrow is the right shift, that makes more sense to me, because all those keys that they use are keys that you normally have to hold as a modifier, so tapping them for arrow keys is never a problem. Anyway, I've probably spent too much time talking about that, but it does significantly impact the usability, in some ways. All right, very quickly, let's look at the Bluetooth functionality here. So we press function and hold down either Q, W, or E for 5 seconds to enter Bluetooth pairing mode. And it should start flashing. And it's, you know why? Because I think we have to go function R to switch modes first. So you saw the bottom left control flashing there to indicate that we have now switched to Bluetooth mode. And now if we press and hold Q, there we go. So this R flashing means that we are, I think, in pairing mode. So let's open the Bluetooth here on my PC. And let's go add Bluetooth or other device. Make sure your device is turned on. There it is. It's immediately detected just simply as keyboard. And then once it's paired, it is detected as the Velocifire TKL61WS. So we are now paired to the PC in Bluetooth mode. So I'm just going to type here. And indeed, it is detecting my input. I do not see any lag, although input lag can vary a little bit. So I will test it out in both wired and wireless mode over the next little while to see how it performs in Bluetooth mode and to test the range and these kinds of things. Now let's try binding a second device here. Let's grab my phone, turn on the Bluetooth. There it is. Let's search for the keyboard. Scanning for devices. There it is. And it is paired. Very good. And let's just open something. Discord, sure. And it is reading inputs, no problem. If we want to switch back to the keyboard, we should simply be able to go function Q just quickly, and then there it is. Excellent. So the Bluetooth seems to work quite well, and it has N key rollover in both wired and wireless mode, which is great to see. One other thing I very quickly forgot to mention, function backspace. Pressing and holding that will reset the entire keyboard. Also worth making note of. All right, let's take a look now at the software. And here we have the software. I can't help but notice that they call it the TKL61WS pretty much everywhere. So I'm not quite sure what the M2 branding is for. Like, it doesn't really serve a purpose. They don't really call it that anywhere. But anyway, whatever. So this software is readily available on Velocifire's website. You just go there and you go to the store page for this keyboard, and it's down at the bottom. There's a download link. You can probably also find it through their support page. You download it. It's just an exe in a zip. You bring it out, you run it, you install it. It's all in English. It installs very quickly. And then it pops up down in your system tray, like many of these pieces of keyboard software do. It seems that it just hangs out there. So it appears to be pretty clean and straightforward. We have the model here, the visual representation of the board here. It detected that the board was plugged in right away. I will also point out that when you switch between wired and Bluetooth mode, it pops up the software again each time the window, which is kind of annoying. Seems a little unnecessary, but anyway. It looks like we can save profiles. So by default, we're on profile 0, but we could probably create one called, well, let's go new. Oh, I have to call it something first. Call it test, and we'll hit new. Successfully created a new profile! Exclamation point. Okay. Oh, and it's actually sort of defaulted the lighting to just a solid white backlight. So on this main page, we can customize the functionality of each key. Let's say we wanted to rebind Q. You can click on it. We have the default, or we can give it a keyboard function. So we can just type in an existing keyboard function. So let's say if we wanted Q to be T. Cool. Q is T now. Don't know why you'd want to do that, but you could. Set it back to default. Typical mouse functions. You can call macros. Combo key. What does this do? Oh, very interesting. Okay, this is actually more than we normally see in this kind of software. So it looks like we can do like, I don't know, ZRT. I see. So you have to click each one. So, okay, so now when I press Q, it will toggle all those, or not toggle, it'll hold all those keys together at once. Interesting. Maybe not super useful, but interesting. I'm sure you could find use for it. You can also have it launch programs. You can bind the multimedia shortcuts, other kinds of Windows hotkey, or forbidden, which I assume just means that it doesn't do anything. It just turns it off. So that's good. Okay, so there's a little bit more there, actually. The remapping is a little deeper than many other keyboard drivers we've seen in past. Okay. And it does actually, interestingly, show secondary functions here, but we cannot access a secondary function layer by the looks of it. Although, I guess what you could do is if you wanted, let's say we wanted to rebind Q to be delete. Just say you wanted to. Delete by default is function B. So I wonder if we could go combo key and make our combo key function. No, we can't set up combo keys with function. Too bad. So we don't really have any way of rebinding that secondary function layer. But I guess you could just simply use the keyboard function and make it delete. If we go, there we go. Yeah, so that works. Okay, so that's good. Everything we need is available. Let's look at lighting. So we can pick our lighting from the drop-down list here. There's a big long list of names. We've seen all of these, so I'm not going to belabor the point too much, but let's go to Outward, say, which is one of my favorites. Oh, you can completely turn the lighting on or off. It's a little ugly. This is kind of sits outside the program window here, but anyway. So you can select whether you want the rainbow colors or whether you want solid colors. We've got a variety of presets, or we can do our basic Windows color selector with all the RGB colors that you could want. Color rendition on here seems okay. Let's just flip through some of our presets here to see how it manages. Yeah, color fidelity is not bad. I've certainly seen worse. I will say the warmer colors, the reds, are very dark by default, even on maximum brightness, as you can see we're at here. This is a dark red, to be fair. That's a brighter red. But the blues, the cooler colors, the blues and the purples, are much more vivid. And of course, the yellows and greens come out quite bright. I find this often a shortcoming of keyboard LEDs. They come through, the reddish tones come through pretty dark. What happens if we set the color to black? Just turns it off. Okay, that makes sense. All the changes seem to happen pretty much instantaneously, so that's nice. Yeah, and the color fidelity does seem pretty good, honestly, pretty good. Set it back to full color, and speed controls. Lots of gradations here. We have directional controls, which don't apply here, but if we set it to, say, scrolling, and we wanted it to change direction and go up, did that change it? No, I don't think it did. I think it's still going top to bottom. That's funny. You would think that's exactly what that control is for, but I'm not sure that that worked properly. Oh well, whatever. A minor detail. We can control direction in hardware anyway, using the keys as we saw. So, that appears to be the lighting situation. But let's quickly also go to user define. So in user define mode, good. Yes, we do get per key color configuration using the software. Again, we have our full RGB color selector. We can select things by groups, or select all, or you can inverse your selection, or you can go key by key. So that's great. That's excellent. How do we go back? Apply, I guess? No? Oh, we just close out. Okay. Let's just switch it back to outward. Okay, that's good to see. Gaming mode. I've seen this on other keyboards before. It's kind of pointless, honestly. but it lets you set up a mode where Alt-Tab, Alt-F4, and the Windows key can be selectively disabled. One or all, any combination thereof, so that you don't accidentally interrupt your gaming experience. I've never had an issue with any of those things, but if you want it, the option's there, and you can toggle that all on or off, which is nice. And then we have a macro recording mode, which is very much like we've seen on other keyboards. We can give it a name, so let's just call this test and hit new. There it is. We can rename, we can delete, we can insert mouse events, we can choose what our delay is, or you can insert a delay. Okay, let's just say, let's start record. Just bloop, 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 stop record. Can we edit the delays? We can clear all items, we can move them up or down. We can delete selected items. You can, in fact, edit each individual input. Not the keys themselves, but the delay time. You can also make it do a fixed delay. So if we clear all events, we set a fixed delay. Let's say we want 10 milliseconds. We go start record, and we go do. There we go. And we get a 10 millisecond delay between all of them. That's nice. And we can insert a delay of, let's say, 20 milliseconds added there. And there it is. Very good, simple, intuitive, powerful. The recording thing flashes while we're recording. Recover, I assume, just resets it. Yeah, in fact, it deletes it, which I don't see how that's different than just deleting here, but anyway. And then you can go bind that over here. Very good. Clean, simple, functional, but reasonably powerful. And here we can choose the text UI color arbitrarily, should you want to change it. We have options of English or a couple of different kinds of Chinese, I suppose. I don't know enough about Chinese to say what those are, but and it looks like a big old reset, where we can reset to factory defaults. Again, also available in hardware in a driverless option with function and holding down backspace. Great. Okay, well, that is the software story here. And overall, this is pretty exemplary. It's not the prettiest piece of software I've ever seen, but it seems pretty functional. It is straightforward. It is laid out in a very clear and understandable way. So it certainly beats the software for a lot of other keyboards that I've used in past. So good job, Velocifire, on something that works well. Okay, we've looked at the backlighting, secondary functions, Bluetooth, software. Now it's time for the typing test. Are you ready to hear and see this board in action? Let's get down to it. Okay, so we've had a chance to look in great detail at the M2. We've taken a look at the RGB backlighting, the Bluetooth functionality, the keyboard functions with the secondary function layer. We checked out the software, and of course, we took it for a test drive. You got to hear it and see it in action. So overall, I'm pretty pleased with this little keyboard. It's really quite solid. I have very little to complain about with it. I will say that the hot swap sockets, as I suspected, are Outemu switches only, which is pretty typical in the budget range. If you want to support a wider variety of switches, you usually end up paying more for a different type of hot swap socket. So no surprise there, but it is still a bit unfortunate. Stock, this board comes with only Outemu brown switches. I wasn't sure when I was unboxing it, but yes, I've confirmed it comes with only Outemu browns. But of course, you can swap those out for any kind of Outemu switches that you like to modify your typing experience. The stock switches, the Outemu browns, are a known quantity. They are consistent performers. They all work just great on this board with nice even actuation force across the board. I think anybody would be hard-pressed to distinguish them from Cherry MX Browns, to be completely honest. So they are very competent Cherry MX clones, and they do the job quite nicely. The typing experience with this board, generally quite favorable, a little bit rattly because those stabilizers are not lubricated, but they didn't feel low quality or anything. And the board in general is pretty solid, thanks in no small part to the 1800 milliamp hour battery that lives inside, that confers a nice solidity and weight. So generally speaking, a pleasant, if fairly unremarkable, typing experience. It works well in both wired and Bluetooth mode. I found the Bluetooth to be reliable with a decent range. I usually just test it within my office space, and it worked from everywhere in the room, which is to say it works from as far away as you would probably ever want to use it, because any further than that, you're probably not going to be able to see the screen that you're using it on. In terms of battery life, Velocifire claims about 8 to 12 hours in Bluetooth mode with the RGB backlight on and doing its thing. They claim, I think, 120 hours with the backlight off. So I used it all day in Bluetooth mode for a couple of days and charged it overnight. I never ran out of juice, so that seems to be fine. I didn't notice any perceptible Bluetooth latency either, which is really good. Some older Bluetooth keyboards did suffer from noticeable lag in the Bluetooth mode. I didn't pick up any of that here. It seemed pretty comparable to the wired mode, which is always good to see, although I do always say that if you want to use it for any kind of competitive or really reflex-oriented gaming, just plug it in. Use the USB-C connector and plug it in for maximum performance. This does ship with a 1-year warranty, which is confirmed in the product manual, which is always nice to see. And unlike some other lesser-known names, Velocifire has established itself as a pretty reliable budget brand, so I expect that they would honor the warranty without any issues. So overall, pretty positive experience using this board. But now it's time to run down the pros and the cons of Velocifire's M2 before I give you my final verdict. For the pros, the things that I liked about Velocifire's M2, we have wired and wireless functionality. It's always nice to have a flexible keyboard and that includes a hardware on-off switch on the back of the board, which is always nice to see. I also thought that it had very pleasing RGB backlighting. Some boards tend to have kind of flickery or unpleasant looking LEDs with poor color rendition. Not the case here. Good color fidelity, nice saturation, not terribly bright, but generally pleasing to look at. Another great pro is the hot swap sockets. Now, of course, you can only use Outemu switches here, which does limit your range of switches quite a bit, but I'd rather have Outemu only hot swap sockets than none at all, and most keyboards at this price point do not offer hot swap sockets. So that's a plus for the M2 here. And finally, I thought that the M2 actually had pretty decent software. Now, admittedly, this is a very low bar. Software for budget keyboards is very, very hit and miss if it exists or is easily attainable at all. In this case, it wasn't the prettiest, but it was clean. It was localized properly. There were no spelling errors. It was reasonably intuitive and decently powerful. It did everything you expected and even a little bit more. So props to Velocifire for some pretty good software. Over here in the cons, the things I maybe didn't like quite so much, I really do have very little to complain about, actually. This is a very competent little keyboard. The two things that I'm going to remark on, one is the questionable choices regarding the arrow keys in the bottom right corner, and I explained this in detail when I was showing the layout of the board, but very briefly, the top function layer, so when you're not holding down any function keys or toggles, has the arrow keys on top of the Alt, the menu, the Control, and the question mark buttons. So by default, those are arrow keys. You have to hold down the function key to modify them to fulfill their normal functions of Alt, menu, Control, and question mark, which means that if you want to type a question mark, you actually have to hold down function, shift, question mark. 3 keys just to use a question mark. The question mark, I don't know about you, but for me it's something I use all the time, and I found that a little bit cumbersome. I do applaud Velocifire's decision to put the arrow keys down there, make them readily accessible, but I don't know if it was worth the sacrifice of making the question mark so awkward and cumbersome to use. So that's one of my cons here. And the other is about the PBT keycaps that came included with the board. Now, to be fair, they are a completely optional pack-in, and as a matter of fact, I did promise you I would show you the board with those caps installed in proper lighting conditions, so here it is. As you can see, they look kind of nice, don't they? They're certainly fun and colorful. They are decently thick as well, but the add-on for these is about $10 if you buy from Velocifire, and at that price I don't think they're great value. You can get a whole set of PBT keycaps for a 60% board for about 15 bucks, so I would say skip the PBT caps add-on unless you're absolutely in love with this particular aesthetic. But that's a pretty minor con, especially considering that they are just an additional add-on that you can make on Velocifire's website. So that's basically it. That's all I have to complain about with this board. So what then is my final verdict on Velocifire's M2 mechanical keyboard? Well, I have very, very little to complain about when it comes to this board. Honestly, it is very solidly made. It is a good performer. It's feature rich. Almost nothing to complain about. You already heard my couple of little quibbles. In fact, the only thing that prevents this board from being an absolute slam dunk is the other competition at this price point. Very, very stiff competition. The likes of For example, the Fecker Machinist, which I did review a little while back. You can check that out if you're curious. It offers a very comparable feature set at the $60 price point to the M2. And the Fecker Machinist has full PBT material keycaps as opposed to the ABS featured on the Velocifire here. Now, the Velocifire does pack in hot swap sockets, so it's a bit of a trade-off. It really depends on what it is that you prefer and prioritize, and I leave you to make that decision. But I will say, at the $60 price point, this is a very solid little keyboard, and it's certainly worth checking out if you're in the market for a wireless 60% gaming oriented mechanical keyboard. I will say that through Velocifire's website, it's available for $63 right now. Through Amazon, it's regularly priced at $70, but if you sign up for Velocifire's newsletter, it looks like they give you a discount that brings it down to $60, and evidently you do get a free keycap upgrade, which presumably means you get these colorful PBT caps. I haven't done it myself, but that seems to be what they're offering. So not a bad deal, worth checking out. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of another relaxing review. Special thanks to Velocifire for supplying the review sample that we took a look at here today. If you're interested in purchasing this board or learning more about it, there are links down at the top of the video description that will get you there. And of course, special thanks to all of you guys for watching. I hope you found this informative. And of course, I hope you found it relaxing. And I look very forward to having you back here next time for another episode of Relaxing Reviews. Bye for now, guys.